I wonder if the passion that you had for photography as the young man that you just referenced, with the thought processes that you've mentioned there, I wonder if that passion was translated directly into your endurance challenges and your athletic pursuits, and therefore the itch that you were scratching with the photography and the freedom and the doing things in your own terms and looking at things in this financial way and being able to photograph others and bring their stories to life, however you want to dress it up. I wonder if that is the same mechanism that you've explored through that exploration of endurance and athleticism over the years. So how did you transition from that young man in London trying to make it as a photographer to the endurance athlete that I'd argue the most varied and eclectic endurance athlete the world has ever seen? Your CV is phenomenal, but it's also so creative, which I love. It's not ego. Look at what I've done. It's look at how I've brought this story to life. Look at this country I've explored. Look at this new way I've done something. And that's what I find most valuable about adventures like yours is the story they tell, the journey they bring to life, rather than the pure athletic pursuit. Because I find the pure athletic pursuit, there's probably always going to be someone faster. There's probably always going to be somebody that can get more tech and do it in a different way. But being the first mover or bringing the story to life so somebody can feel like they were there with you is where the art truly is. And that's what I think you've done better than anyone on the planet, in my personal opinion. So before we dive into what all that looked like, how did you go from that young man in London to essentially the bloke you are today?
Well, it was gradual, you know. I mean, the transition, actual transition, was hated photography, realised I couldn't do it anymore, so sold my business to my business partner for £1. So practically, I was in this, I was living in London, very expensive. I didn't save any money doing the photography, nothing at all, zero, because I was sort of hand to mouth, and the photography was doing well, but James and I were growing the business, so we took out some big loans to pay for staff and offices and equipment and blah, 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 blah. So when I sold the business for £1, which for me was, to keep our friendship, James and I, he's like my best mate, he was the best man at my wedding, years after we finished the photography. I didn't want to ruin that for the sake of money. And then also, I was sort of putting a flag in the ground going, right, from now on, I'm not doing anything purely for money. Which again was very idealistic, and goes exactly against what I've just said earlier, because you do need to sort of put food on the table. But what it did is it just engaged the terrier. It just said, right, terrier, go and get some food. So in my head I was like, right, well, I want to go traveling, because that was the dream with photography, is to use the camera to go traveling. What else can I do in that world? And I just thought, well, I could maybe try and do some magazine stuff, but no one's really probably going to pay me to go traveling the world for a whole year to do features, because without a portfolio. I could go and work abroad, but that sort of didn't really scratch an itch that I had. I didn't know what the itch was, to be honest. I knew that I just was miserable getting out of bed every day. And I just wanted, I think that was probably it. That was probably the sort of thing I wanted. I wanted something to chase, which would get me excited. So then I just sort of thought about it. I thought about Mark Beaumont, who had done his round the world bike ride years before. And that immediately, I just went down a rabbit hole of people who've done world records, whether it's, climbing Everest or rowing oceans or cycling. And they all seem to have sort of sponsored logos on them. And I suddenly thought, well, they've just had a crazy idea and they've managed to go and get some funding from people. Maybe that's what I could do. Maybe I could just follow that sort of idea loosely. And, so I sort of had, well, I don't know. I mean, I remember, I think it was I could survive in London for 3 months maybe after I sold the business, with what was in the bank and some credit cards and things like that. So I really was sort of quite stressed to make something happen. Otherwise, my fallback, luckily, I had a fallback, which was going to live with my mum in a 1-bedroom flat in Cheltenham. So I did have that at least. So I wasn't going to land up on the street. So yeah, that I sort of just got into trying to do something in the world of sort of adventure and sport and records, because it was a way for to do something in the world of travel and get someone else to pay for it, basically. So that got me into the round the world bike ride. That was the first thing I tried because I figured I could do it quite cheaply. It wasn't going to be that expensive to do in the grand scheme of lots of the other things like Everest and South Pole and all that, or rowing an ocean. And I just went out and just tried to get funding, basically. And then, managed to get the funding and do that. And that didn't, I got run over in America, but still, and I carried on for charity. But when I got back, I sort of had stumbled across a way of living a new life, really, even though I didn't know it at the time. When I got back from the round the world cycle, I tried to get back into work. I had no money. I signed on to the dole. I was on the dole living with my mum in a 1-bedroom flat at the age of 31, going to the job centre every couple of weeks, applying for jobs in bike shops, in photographic studios, because obviously I needed to earn something. I have no A levels, didn't go to university, so I was sort of, I wouldn't say unemployable, but I didn't really have a CV at all, So, tried that for a while. That didn't work.
So round one was Land's End Johnny Groats on a bike, wasn't it? The length of Britain, cycling the length of Britain, and essentially
as a holiday, yeah.
A holiday. I can imagine with some lessons along the way in making this up as you go along, building the wings as you fly, as I like to say. So, what were the harshest lessons from that first solo endeavour, and are there any lessons that you took from that are now something that you consider every time you take on a challenge, an event, or even day-to-day life?
Well, yeah, the lessons I learned from the Land's End John O'Groats first attempt was don't do it that way. So everything I did on there is how not to do it, basically. Don't do it in April, it's freezing cold. Don't carry 5 panniers, But I had to back then, it was pre-smartphone, so I had a Lonely Planet book of Britain, which is huge. It's bigger than the one for India. It's massive. It's amazing as well. I had a map guide book. I had a camping guide book. I had an actual book, Wilbur Smith. Read a couple of his books. So, one pannier was just full of paper. And then another one was full of cameras. And then the other one, I had like casual shoes as well. Even though I could completely walk in my cycling shoes because they were sort of mountain bike ones with full tread. So I didn't even wear my casual shoes. I took a pair of jeans. I'm like, what were you thinking, man? So I guess, I learned to streamline. So after that trip, it was, I had too much kit, basically. But, it was I found it quite easy. I think that was, because I'd done the Land's End John O'Groats cycle in 25 days, which is painfully slow. But I sort of found it easy. I enjoyed cycling and I enjoyed going uphill, which even is something I enjoy now. I really like uphills. I'm not a big fan of downhills in any sport, really. So it's, I guess I got the bug a little bit, but strangely, so I did that in 2008. And I remember getting back from Land's End John O'Groats and I cleaned my bike and put it in the shed, and I was like, right, this is the beginning of, I'm going to go adventures every weekend. I'm going to start Audax riding. I was hooked.